Chapter 6. The Prince of Bleeders. Thursday, September 12th. Benjamin Rush found himself exhausted and near collapse as the day drew to a close. It wasn't simply that since the College of Physicians had met, he had spent every waking minute seeing patients, usually over 100 a day. Rush had yellow fever. My body became highly impregnated with the contagion. My eyes were yellow, and sometimes a yellowness was perceptible on my face, he noted. His sleep was irregular, and he frequently woke to find his bed linen soaked through with his own sweat. These sweats were so offensive, he wrote, as to oblige me to draw the bedclothes close to my neck to defend myself from their smell. Despite the aches, despite dizziness and nausea, despite it all, Rush still saw and advised patients. He had to. He believed he was one of the few physicians still seeing nearly 6,000 persons, then ill with the fever. So he struggled on day after exhausting day. When it was evening, I wished for morning. When it was morning, the prospect of the labors of the day caused me to wish for a return of the evening. Words of Rush's illness spread and increased the citizens' fear. A number of well-known doctors had abandoned their patients and scampered to safer air. 10 others had died, while still more were ill and could not receive patients. But from the moment that the fevers first began to claim the victims, Dr. Rush was a tower of energy and care, an ever-present Good Samaritan. Now that he was ill, what would happen to the people who relied on him? More alarming still, Rush had recently announced that he had an absolute cure for the disease, something no other doctor had claimed. If Rush died, if his cure failed to save him, then all hope would vanish, and after the fever would march on unobscured. Rush did not happen upon his cure easily or immediately. During the earliest days of the fever, Rush had treated patients with great caution. Doctors of the air believed in what was called visus metacarchix naturae, the healing power of nature. In other words, the body took its own measures to rid the humors of poison and set them in balance once again. The doctor's job was to coax the body along the process. For the most part, medical treatment was very gentle. Herbs and teas were prescribed to break a slight fever. A glass of brandy would help a restless patient go to sleep. Of course, some symptoms required slightly more drastic measures to effect a cure. If a doctor suspected a patient's intestines were blocked, he might use a few drops of a poisonous substance to induce vomiting and diarrhea. Bloodletting, or phlebotomy, was also practiced. In this procedure, a vein was opened and a small amount of blood was drawn off into a bowl. With a tad less blood, the theory went, the remaining blood would flow more freely and normally through the body. Bloodletting was an ancient and trusted medical practice and had been used for more than 2,500 years. Patients were bled to relieve headaches, depression, disease, and anxiety. Even a broken bone would bring out the lance and bowl. Of the various symptoms of yellow fever also called for bloodletting. At the beginning of the epidemic, Rush used mild purges and moderate bleedings to urge patients to sit in the cool air, take baths, and eat light meals. This clearly wasn't enough because his patients continued to die. After he visited with Miss LeMaigre and determined that she was battling yellow fever, Rush began to change his tactics. If the patient failed to show immediate improvement with mild treatments, he stepped up his attack. He administered bark, the shaved root of a tree such as dogwood, along with wine, brandy, and aromatics such as ginger or cinnamon. He tried to sweat the fever out of a patient by coating various parts of his or her body with a thick salve composed of herbs and chemicals. These applications were called blisters because they often irritated the skin enough to turn a livid red. Finding them all ineffectual, I attempted to rouse the symptoms by wrapping the whole body in blankets dipped in warm vinegar. Nothing worked, and more of Rush's patients went to the grave. Each death shook him personally. In a letter to his Julia, Rush's anguish was clear. You can recollect, how much of the loss of a single patient in a month used to affect me. Judge then now I must feel in hearing every morning the death of 3 or 4. Another doctor might have thrown up his hands in bewilderment and admitted defeat, but not Benjamin Rush. He believed firmly that every illness had a cure, and that all he had to do to discover it was to work harder. He spent every minute he could rummaging through his library, searching for some bit of information that might show him the light. It was while poring over his old medical books that he came upon John Mitchell's letter about yellow fever plagues that it had occurred in Virginia some 50 years before. One of Michael's observations leapt off the page for Rush. Mitchell asserted that as soon as the stomach and intestines filled with blood, they had to be emptied at all costs. Otherwise, the blood would turn putrid and stop the body from its normal process of healing. Mitchell also advised physicians to put aside any ill-timed scrumptious about the weakness of the body and purge the patients ruthlessly. Instead of merely helping nature heal the body, Mitchell was telling doctors to command and direct it along with the proper course. Rush then decided to try the strongest purge he knew of, known then as 10 and 10. Last used during the Revolutionary War, this recipe called for a patient to swallow 10 grains, not quite 1/3 of an ounce, of calomel, which is mercury, and 10 grains of jalap, the poisonous root of a Mexican plant related to the morning glory that was dried and powdered before ingesting. Both were highly toxic, and the body would work hard to expel them. Rush would, in effect, poison the patient in order to produce extreme vomiting and diarrhea. His first use of the treatment seemed to work, even though he had to force the concoction down his patient's throat. He then decided to speed up the process by increasing the dosage of 10 and 15 and administering it 3 times in a single day until it resulted in 5 large evacuations. Rush then began experimenting with the amount of blood that he would remove from the body. In an effort to reduce inflammation, he, like most doctors then, believed that the body held approximately 25 pounds of blood. Since the body actually holds less than half this amount, most people who were bled so drastically passed out at some point during the procedure. For Rush and other doctors as well, this was simply a sign that the treatment was indeed working. Few doctors kept accurate records on recovery rates during the yellow fever plague, but since Rush saw improvement in those that he treated, he sensed that his cure was working, and working well. On September 3rd, he claimed that 8 out of 12 patients had gotten better with just one treatment. The next day, he saw 9 out of 10 over the fever. By September 5th, he was able to write to Julia that I now saved 29 out of 30 of all to whom I am called to the first day of their illness. Many doctors disputed Rush's cure rate and felt his 10 and 15 purge and copious bleedings dangerous. Dr. Alan Kuhn called the mercury and jalap drink a murderous dose and said so in the newspapers. Dr. Jean Devis, a recent French arrival, condemned Rush with passion. He, I say, is a scourge more fatal to the humankind than the plague itself would be. Other doctors agreed with Kuhn and Devis and put forward their own treatments, though no one claimed to have found an absolute cure as Rush did. Almost every one of them called for much milder methods than Rush's. Dr. William Curry completely rejected Rush's bloodletting and the use of mercury, saying such methods cannot fail to being certain death. Instead, he suggested modest purging, that patients be gently induced to sweat, that their hands and feet be bathed in vinegar and water, and that they get as much cool, fresh air as possible. Rush took any challenge, whether from the disease or from the college, as a personal attack to be confronted and conquered. When his ideas were questioned, he sensed a malicious conspiracy and counterattacked. Besides combating with the yellow fever, I have been obliged to contend with the prejudices, fears, and falsehoods of several of my brethren, all of which retard the pass of true and daily cost of our city in many lives. Those he challenged fired back with equal ferocity. Ebenezer Hazard refused Rush's treatment as extreme, saying he would order blood enough draw to fill a helmet with as little ceremony as a mosquito would fill himself upon your leg. It wasn't a behind closed doors disagreement either. It was carried on into the city's newspapers so that all citizens knew of the dispute. Some even joined in with their own opinions. From his upstate New York retreat, where he and his wife were recuperating, Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton wrote to praise the cure used by his doctor, who openly rejected Rush's cure. The Secretary of War, Henry Knox, also followed the public feuding and wrote, "The different opinions on this treatment excited great inquietude, but Rush bears down on all before him." Then Rush fell ill, and everyone waited to see what would happen. To his credit, Rush did not hesitate to use his own cure. He turned himself over to two of his young assistants who bled him and administered the purge. It would be months before Rush truly regained his strength, but within 5 days he was back on his feet and valiantly seeing patients in his home. On September 19th, he hired a horse-drawn cart and began visiting patients again. His fever lingered on, and his cough worsened, and climbing stairs was difficult. But in Rush's mind, his treatment had produced yet another cure. "Thus you see," he wrote to Julia, "that I have proven upon my own body that yellow fever, when treated in this new way, is no more than a common cold." People now flocked to his home for the cure. 150 a day sought him out. His 5 assistants each saw 30 patients a day. They bled so many and so aggressively that they ran out of vessels to hold the blood. In the end, they were forced to perform this procedure out of doors, bleeding patients directly onto the paved stones on the street. Neither Rush nor his assistants could handle the press of sick people demanding his cure. Rush then showed members of the Free African Society how to drain blood from a patient, and they marched out to perform over 800 bleedings. Even Rush's 11-year-old servant boy, Peter, was trained to open a vein and set it out to see the sick. In reality, Rush's cure probably did more harm than good. Yet he never lost faith in it, never doubted it. Not even when 3 of his assistants and his beloved sister Rebecca died did he doubt. Why should he? Every day he received letters thanking him for his cure. Every day hundreds of desperate people lined up outside his door or sent him frantic notes asking for his help. While a handful of his colleagues embraced his cure, most of Philadelphia's doctors condemned his methods and dubbed Rush the Prince of Bleeders. Yet, they may have judged him too harshly. Medicine was in a curious state of transition at the end of the 18th century, groping towards a more scientific and precise explanation of diseases, while still clinging to the beliefs hundreds, even thousands of years old, that were still rooted in mythology and folk tales. Rush's treatment was based on an if extreme, medical principles of the time, and tested under the pressures of a raging plague. Maybe even more important, it gave the average citizen trapped in Philadelphia and at the mercy of the merciless killer a cause for hope. Dr. Benjamin Rush was, after all, living proof that the disease could be beaten. Rush became a hero, and his fame soon spread beyond Philadelphia. Circuit Judge William Bradford, after hearing a number of stories about Rush's bravery and cures, wrote, "He is become the darling of the common people, and his humane fortitude and exertions will render him deservedly dear." So formidable was his reputation that Benjamin Rush could stride into a sick room and calmly tell a suffering individual, "You have nothing but the yellow fever." That is the end of chapter 6.